On April 24, 1944, George Stinney Jr. was robbed of his potential. His dreams were tossed asunder. His family was forced to contemplate on his loss, and we never got to see who George Stinney Jr. could become. He was accused of having raped one white girl and murdered another. And even though the evidence pointed to the falsehood of this conviction, an all-white jury arrived at the so-called sound decision that George Stinney Jr. had done it, and he was sentenced to death, or rather murder, via the electric chair. And in 70 years post this happening, George Stinney Jr.'s conviction, according to The Man Not by Professor Tommy J. Curry, he states that Stinney's conviction was vacated by right of coram nobis, not on the grounds that the judgment against him was wrong on the merits, but on the grounds that the courts have failed in a capital case to discharge their proper functions with due regard to the constitutional safeguards in the administration of justice. Coram nobis, the devil's recompense, is what black men and boys are afforded by default. False accusations are enough to lead to a conviction that robs us of our potential. George Stinney Jr., the reason the accusation was believed was because there was already an ongoing, multi-century narrative that has been repeatedly reinforced and reiterated to and throughout the society that the devil's appearance, his countenance, is everything representative of a black man. Coram nobis was all that this young black boy was afforded, having been completely robbed of his potential and the ability to be. And the unfortunate implications of this is that us as black men, our boys, our uncles, our fathers, we can be afforded the same recompense by default if we so choose to go with society's defaults. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know if we're going to be able to see tomorrow next week or a year from now. But with each passing day, we do have the ability to stand up and rise against society's defaults afforded to black men and boys. We can choose to map out our own adventure with our own goals and achieve said goals. While we're living, while we take breath, we owe it to not only ourselves, but the many black men and boys who were robbed of their potential and their ability to reach their dreams and goals. We owe it to them and ourselves to not stay put. We owe it to them and ourselves to become who we are meant to be. So George Stinney Jr.'s case is no longer such a common thing. We're so used to the George Stinney Jr. conviction playing out in a number of ways when it comes to us. And the only way that we can overcome this type of destiny is by creating a counter destiny. And that starts with what we do day to day. I don't know about you all, but I'm not comfortable with what society opts to pay me by default. I'd rather go out and create my own system, create my own narrative, create my own compensation and economy, because what the devil is opting to afford us is not enough. And there will come a time where the devil will have to pay us his dues, his and her dues. The only way that we can arrive at this is if we are opening up the path through daily action, through daily counteraction to society's defaults. The only way that George Stinney Jr. and other black men and boys die in vain is if we as black men and boys opt to not achieve our fullest potential. If we as black men and boys opt to not utilize the time that we do have to make something happen with all that we have. Coram nobis is society's default compensation for black men and boys, but that default is not enough. The devil's recompense, coram nobis, is not enough. And the only way that we can get what we're owed is by taking destiny into our own hands and injecting a counter narrative through the unlocking and the fulfillment of our purpose and potential as black men and boys. 1.